Hey folks, well I thought I would just do a quick video on basically revisiting the hydraulic flat tappet lifter issue. We did a video probably 3 or 4 years ago regarding hydraulic flat tappet lifter failures. And I think we got 11,000 views on that. And I just want to talk about the failures that we had, what type of failures we had, what engines they were in, and what I think, at least what from my perspective, the engines we build can help prevent those failures. So I want to revisit and I'm going to go back, talk about the two different types of failures. I'm going to start off, I have never had a flat tappet valve train go flat and damage the cam or the lifter when we go to break these things in and run them. We haven't had any of those failures. And those engines that we've built, they've been out there since 2016, 15. They're running fine. We had one engine a car come in that was bought by a real nice guy there in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex area. He bought a 67 Chevelle from one of these antique car lots. And I forgot what the name of it is. And they got some pretty nice cars in those places, but you got to be very careful. So he goes and buys a 67 Chevelle with a big block Chevy and a 4-speed, really nice car. Well, he drove it for, I think what he said, for about 20 minutes, and it started rattling really, really bad. Had it towed to our place, and man, I fired it up and said, oh man, that thing is bad. We disassembled it, and I'll try to see if I can. I'm not real good at inserting, but I'll try to maybe see if I can insert some of the older videos. And I'm going to try to reference what videos those were on these flat tappet failures. But long story short, that engine, whoever built that engine previously, had set the valve springs up for a roller cam. I had those taken into our machine shop and showed them what was going on. And our machinist, David Schweitzer there at Wells Racing, he said, hey, do you know this thing's got roller cam spring pressures on a flat tappet cam? So sure enough, that's what it was. Rebuilt that engine. Heck, that had to be 3 years ago. And man, he is doing great. So no issues there. The other 3 failures that we had during our build and our test were related to bleed issues and staying pumped up. We had one small block Chevy, one Pontiac, it was a 389 Pontiac, and one big block Mopar. It was a 383 stroker Mopar. And what happened was we broke the cam in. So when we build these engines and we set the valve, I always make sure I take it to my machine shop and I have them set the valve springs up. I'm not going to mess with that. That's nothing that I'm going to experiment with other people's engines. And frankly, I just paid somebody to do it. It's not that expensive. Pay a professional to set that stuff up. Could I do it? Yeah, I could. But I just soon let them do it. Because they're doing all the other head work to it anyway. Why not let them just do everything? Just take the cam car to them. So when we break these things in, we obviously use a high zinc oil. I use the Valvoline VR1. It has high zinc. I believe it's a 20W50. And then sometimes I'll use the Lucas zinc additive. Now, they do say you can get carried away with the zinc using too much zinc. But when we break these things in, I make sure I have a really high zinc oil. Now, those failures in that Pontiac, that Chevy, that Pontiac, and that Mopar, we broke the cam in, seemed like everything was fine, but when we got to, we ran them on the test stand, and I noticed that the valve train would just kind of get loud and stay loud. Never could figure out what it was till I put a compression tester on it, and I could see it just the compression just bumping everywhere. Then took the valve covers off, and I could see where nothing was holding any kind of pressure. Now again, when I build an engine, just like all you guys out there, a lot more professional than I am, I'm sure, you prelude the engine, you prelude the valve train, make sure you got oil going through all the circuits, and that's how I set up. I measure for my push rods it's got to be pumped up, and I order my push rods for measurements that way as well. So usually I use a high volume oil pump. Sometimes I use a stock oil pump. Sometimes in some engines, maybe use a high pressure pump. But we had plenty of oil pressure in these engines. The Chevy had, it was not an oil pressure issue. Same way with the Pontiac and the Mopar. They both had, I know on the Mopar I always use a Melling HV pump. So again, I wasn't having any oil pressure issues. I had bleed down issues. And of course, a lot of this was happening during COVID. So that was probably about 4 years ago that we did that. So I guess what I want to say is, revisiting that is, for one, when you set your flat tappet valve train up, make sure you've got the right valve spring pressure. Number two, make sure you're running the right oil. And then number three, when you go to break the engine in, I get that thing set up as close as I can on top dead center, and I make sure that the ignition system, everything is set up so that when I get ready to start it, it's going to fire. I get my timing as close as I can, but as soon as I fire them up, I see that I've got oil pressure coming up. I'm taking that thing all the way up to 2,000, 2,100 RPM, somewhere in there, and I let it run at 2,100 RPM, maybe 22, for about, I would say, 15 to 20 minutes. And then I would say probably more around 18 minutes, I'll go ahead and I'll lower that RPM around to maybe 1,500. But when I start lowering it down to 1,500 for that last 5 to 10 minutes, I'm definitely, going through the throttle, not gunning it, but varying the throttle speed. Not coming below 1,500, but take it up to 2,000, back down to 15, back up to 2,500, just varying that RPM. And then after about that 20 to 25 minute break-in period, then I slowly let it come down to idle, and I'm listening for any kind of valve train noise. Now I have a stethoscope that I like to use. It's over here, that I like to use on the valve covers. This is what I use, and look like Quincy or an MD, but I mean, it works. You just put this up on the valve cover, and I can start telling right then if I've got any clatter. So the engines we built, I don't tend to have built as many engines as Nick or on Nick's Garage or any of these other guys, but I've definitely built my share. So this goes for small and big block Chevy, Pontiacs, 389, 400s, Oldsmobiles, 350 Oldsmobiles, 400 Oldsmobiles, 455 Oldsmobiles, Fords, whether it's 302, 289, 351, all the Windsors, and then the FEs. I've done the 390s and the 428s, and then of course small and big block Mopar. So again, like say for instance, now what brand of lifter do you want to use, right? So I see a lot of people, they'll blame comp cams, and maybe comp cams, I'm not going to say they didn't have a rash or have had a rash of these bad lifters. I'm not going to say that, whether they did or didn't, and I'm not going to say that what I'm saying is this golden standard. But there are certain brands of lifters I like to use when I build certain engines. So for a Mopar, if I'm going to build a flat tappet engine on a Mopar, like on this 340 stroker over here on Kevin's Dart, I like to use the Hughes. They sell a Johnson high lift. It's they have one it's more expensive, but it has a slower bleed rate, I believe, and they work fantastic, and I never had an issue with them. On Oldsmobiles and Pontiacs, I like to use, I think it's I want to say it was Howard's, but maybe that was the roller lifters on those engines. I can't remember. But again, and let's talk about hydraulic rollers. I have seen, and especially heard, where even hydraulic lifters roll on the roller cams, that they've had bleed down issues. When I took that lifter apart in that video, and I can't remember, but I believe I found some dirt and some debris inside that quote new lifter. And I think that could have been an issue of maybe contamination getting in some of these things when they were built. But everybody knows, on a flat tappet, no, this is not flat. You can kind of see the marks. It's ground where it's off. And yeah, I can even, as I turn it, I can even see where it dips down and goes up. Obviously, this thing's got to be turning in that lifter bore. When you go to put these lifters in, your lifter bores, again, I sit there, I soak my lifters. Some people say you don't have to. Some people say do it. It's worked for me. But when I go in, I just go in gently, and I like to spin it as it goes in. So I know that it's spinning inside that bore. Now, another thing to check for, especially on your roller cams when you're building on a valve train, is where this annulus is at right here. And you see this little hole. That oil is coming through that circuit, and that's how it pumps up through that little hole right there. As this thing goes up and down in that lifter bore, you want to make sure that annulus is not getting exposed coming up out of the lifter bore. I know big block Chryslers have had that issue on some roller lifters. So that's why it's imperative that you want to make sure that you pre-lube and you watch. Make sure you don't have oil coming up around this lifter. If you do, you got some issues. You stop right there. But I've built flat tappet cammed engines. I can't tell you how many since that video. Again, Chevys, Mopars, Fords, the customers with a lot of those engines, they didn't want to spend the money for that roller, or for that, for a roller cam setup. So they were very scared of these, and I understand why. When we built Glenn's Pontiac 400, or his 350 stroker, excuse me, he said, I don't want to take any chances. I'll just go ahead and spend the extra money. Let's go with a roller valve train. Hey, and that's good. And it was probably a good decision. They're going to make more power anyway. You're going to make a little bit more power with a roller profile cam. I know some may dispute me. Maybe I'm wrong. But when I see you're going to gain horsepower going to roller. So you guys tell me, am I off? Am I wrong? I know I just recently saw Mopar Joe, Joe Williams. He's built a lot of big block Mopars here recently. Maybe some small blocks too. Joe's built more Mopars than I have. And he's using flat tappets. And I've yet to see him have any issues. I have seen Nick Panarides. He had a big block Chevy on one of his videos. And he was having some issues with the lifter integrity. And I want to say, I thought he had, I could be wrong. Definitely not questioning Nick Panarides. But I thought he was talking about some flat tappet issues on some big block Chevys. But I've built a bunch of big block Chevys. I would say not as many as your Chevy, like your diehard Chevy people, but I've built plenty of between now and that video, and I hadn't had any problems. So same way with the Fords and the Mopars. So yeah, you guys tell me. I know there was a lot of discussion on that, grabbed a lot of attention. Again, all I can say to do is start off when you build that engine, make sure you pre-lube it, and you set your valve train up properly with the proper proper preload. I like to set these up with 30 thousandths preload on the lifter. I think it's 30 to 40, they say. So, and then as I go in and I pre-lube the engines, I turn it over while I'm by hand, while we're pre-lubing it. So you hits all your oil circuits, and I watch in that valley where you put your lifter. I look to see if there's any oil seeping up around that lifter. But yeah, I think that the lifters that we had with the bleed down issue, it had to do with contamination, I believe, inside those lifters in there. When I took that thing apart, I had dirt and everything. I had a little white, very nice white blanket like this, and I used, I believe it was some kind of contact cleaner, and you could just see the dirt and the trash that was everywhere. So those were the bleed down issues. A lot of dirt track guys in different classes, you have to run a flat tappet. That's the way it was, it seemed anyway. But I haven't heard anything from the dirt track guys recently. I'm sure that they've had plenty of issues, but they still run flat tappets in a lot of those classes. They're turning a lot of RPMs. So You guys tell me. Tell me what you think. Revisiting the hydraulic flat tappet lifter issue. So far, knock on wood, so good. Everything's been working fine. So, hope everybody has a good day. Happy Sunday, everybody.